Yes.
Chapter 3. Yes, so we're on chapter 3 of Rosh HaShanah, and we're going to begin with the end of what we've been talking about so far. So up to this point, we've been talking about the announcing of the new month. And the first Mishnah in chapter 3 is kind of going to finish off that topic. And we're going to review some of the ideas that we talked about last week about the authority of the court and the importance of the court. But then we're going to move into the halacha of shofarot, of the blowing of the shofar. So let's go ahead and take care of Mishnah 1. Volunteers?
Okay, I will start.
Okay.
If the Beit Din and all of Israel saw the moon, or if the witnesses were interrogated, but they did not manage to say, it is sanctified, before it grew dark, it is full.
Okay, so basically if everybody saw it, everybody knows that it was the right month, or they had valid testimony from valid witnesses, but before they could make the declaration, remember we talked about last week that this month is the new month, we have sanctified the new month, it doesn't matter. If you miss the window, then it's not the new month. Then you have to add the extra day. Right? So what this is trying to say is, and this is why I said it's going to be sort of reviewing what we talked about last week, is even if everybody knows that the new month was visible on this day, if you didn't make the proclamation, then it's not the new month, right? Then last month continues for the extra day.
That's for one more.
Right, yeah, last month is still going until you can make the declaration. So if you miss it, you miss it.
What does mean it is full?
It means that the month continues to have the full time.
Oh, okay.
Right, you don't stop the month, because remember, months can only be of certain lengths. They knew how long it took the moon to go around the earth. It's just a question of whether it would be visible on this day or visible the next day. Even if it was visible on the proper day, and even if you had testimony, and even if you had all of the Beit Din, the whole Sanhedrin saw the moon, if you don't say the words, it didn't happen. Right? If you don't make the declaration, and that goes back to what we talked about last week, that it is, you will declare my times. That without the court's declaration, it's not happening yet.
So it would be, let's say, because they mentioned here 30 days,
Mm-hmm.
it can be 31 days. So what happened with the next month? On
Nothing.
29?
You wait until the next moon, the next moon, and then you're fine. Yeah.
So it's like we don't count the days, it's just
Yes,
looking.
Right.
To the moon.
Well, that is counting. I mean, they could look at the moon and know what day it was. Remember, we talked before, you could look at the moon, know what day it was. You could look at the moon and the stars and know what month it was. All right, you look at the sun during the day, you know what hour it is. Who needs a clock?
Let's throw them out.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really need it. And it's not like they were, with a stopwatch down to 2 minutes or something. I mean, for most things in life, they didn't really need precision like we think we need.
Timing.
Yeah, as if we really need that level of precision, because if it's not at 3:23, then it's wrong. We're a little crazy about time in the modern world. But that's a whole nother conversation. Let's carry on.
If only Beit Din saw it, two of them should stand and testify before the others, and they should say, it is satisfied, it is sanctified.
Right. So if they didn't have any additional witnesses, but you did have the Beit Din, two of the members of the Beit Din can say it, even if everybody saw it. You have two people who act as witnesses. They take the job of being the Adim, the witnesses.
If three saw it and they constitute a Beit Din, then two should stand up and set some of the corrects beside a single one and testify before them and say, it is satisfied, it is sanctified. Or an individual is not trusted alone. Right?
So you're allowed to have the two witnesses from the Beit Din, who are also the Dayanim, who are also usually the judges. They leave the Beit Din and become witnesses. And you get two more people to become the rest of the Beit Din. So now you're back up to three. And then the two give their testimony in front of the three. But only one of them is the original three from the original Beit Din.
The Beit Din were only 3.
For this one, yes.
The whole Sanhedrin.
Well, so eventually things became more difficult, right? More as we talked about. So officially, yes, it's supposed to be the Sanhedrin, but here we're dealing with, should we call it emergency situations? Right.
So which of the Beit Din is the one that needs to sanctify? Because I think that only 3 rabbis will be in different cities.
Well,
so which one is the official one?
And that is why you didn't have, at a certain point, you didn't have official ones. And so that's why eventually we had to do the whole calculation and remove the witnessing of the moon altogether. And it just became fixed. Because otherwise, you still needed to have a declaration. But if it was not able to come from the Sanhedrin because of the politics, of the people who were causing trouble for us, then you had to do it locally, but that was becoming problematic. And so we just ended up with one version for everyone by paper.
Yeah, because what happens if one local say, oh yes, it's new month, they sanctify, but a different city, no?
Well, I mean, as we talked about last week with Rabban Gamliel, if one has authority over the other, then they can force them to listen to their ruling. So, but if they don't have authority over the other, then you would go by whatever the local ruling was. I mean, that's why we needed to have something that was unified but didn't rely on our physically being connected.
So what is the hierarchy of the authority? Like after Jerusalem, who's coming next?
Well, I mean, after Jerusalem, we had Yavne, and then after Yavne, it moved up to different places up in the Galil. The Sanhedrin was up there as well for a while, at different places. Mm-hmm. But eventually, it was too hard to get the Sanhedrin all together, and so you had these smaller courts, and then eventually, even the smaller courts couldn't communicate with the diaspora, and so they went to math. Because math you can rely on, people not so much.
I think maybe it's an answer. Number 3, maybe answer for the first one. That for some reasons they couldn't sanctify the new month, so this is like a way of to bypass maybe, or to do it, because maybe they didn't have enough dayanim in the Beit Din, maybe or something.
Well, I mean, the thing to remember is that if you don't see the moon, then it just will become the new month when the next day passes, right? It can never be more than one extra day, because the moon is coming back even if I haven't seen it. So like, if it's cloudy for 6 weeks, you don't just have a 6-week long month. You know that it's just month plus 1. But so the question here is not how do we fix it when the situation of observation is broken? It's how do we fix it when our authority is broken? Right? Because the observation, we're only going to be off by 1 or 2 days, and we have the backup plan of just, okay, we had a day and we're fine. It's not ideal because we're supposed to do it when we see it. God gave us the sign of the moon that we're supposed to be able to declare and follow. But if we don't, it's not a catastrophe. But the question here isn't if we don't, the question is, what if we can't? What if the court is having problems, right? Not the moon, not the witnesses, but the court. And so these are what is being resolved. Okay, shall we turn to Shofarot? Okay, chapter 3, Mishnah 2, ready to blow.
Mishnah 2. All shofars may be used except for that of a cow, because it is a Karen.
Okay, so we're doing a little vocabulary here, right? So we have the word shofar, and we have the word Karen. And the issue here is that you can only blow a shofar that is made from a shofar, not from a Karen. Now, this sounds really weird because in English, we use the word shofar usually just to mean the thing we blow on Rosh HaShanah. Right? We don't say, I was at the zoo yesterday and I was looking at the goat and it had a beautiful shofar. Right? Most Americans would never use that word like that.
Potential shofar.
Well,
no, with my daughter we play, oh look, that could be a great shofar.
Right. So according to the rabbis, their understanding of the word shofar is that it means horn both here and here. And so when you look at a goat, it has a shofar. And when you look at a cow, it has a Karen. In English, we would call them both horns, but the rabbis are trying to make a distinction. Now, there's a problem with that distinction, which Rabbi Yosef is going to try and bring to our attention.
Rabbi Yosef said, are not all shofars called Karen, as it says? When they make a long blast with the ram Karen horn.
Right. From Isaiah, it uses the word Karen to talk about goats. So Karen and shofar, they're synonyms. Right? You can't say the cow has a Karen, but the ram has a shofar. The ram also has a Karen. Right? It's the same thing. It's just two different words to mean the same thing. So the Mishnah doesn't resolve this, but the Gemara does. But I knew you'd be interested for that.
The shofar is supposed to be from only male ram.
We're getting there. we're getting for that. But the core halacha is basically the core halacha boils down to any horn that's not from a cow, as long as it is an actual horn. That is to say, it's hollow in the middle, right? So the question is, why not the cow, right? What's wrong with the cow? And the first answer that's being used in the Mishnah here is linguistically iffy, right? Because they're saying, well, the cow, we call that a Karen, but we don't call a gazelle a Karen. No, of course you would call that a Karen, right? It's a synonym. But what eventually the Talmud comes up with is two answers. One is they say all these other animals' horns, rams, gazelles, kudu, all this other stuff, ibex, those could be called shofar or could be called Karen. But a cow, no one calls a cow's horn a shofar. They only call that a Karen. And therefore, we don't use the cows. Now, this is probably a little bit after the fact, meaning that we look at these other animals and see a potential shofar, and we look at a cow and we don't. Why not? Well, possibly, the Gemara says, because the cow is the accuser, right? It's the cow that we used for the golden calf.
And also the paraduma.
Yeah. Well, the paraduma is not
It's a cow.
but it's not a sensitive problem. Right? Whereas the Egel Zahav, that was when we made this huge mistake, this big sin before God. And we're going to say, okay, God, new year, everything's going to be better. Remember this? We don't want God remembering that. We don't want to return to what we remember doing. Right? So we're just putting the cow's horn away. So any kosher animal that has a horn that's actually hollow can be used. So you can get exotic horns. Now, as I'm sure you're both aware, there is a strong preference talked about in the Gemara as well as in other books for using a ram's horn, specifically because of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. But that is not halacha, right? It's not if you use a different horn, like many people like to use the kudu horn, which is the very long spiral one. That's perfectly fine. And there are many other kosher shofarot that you can buy as well. Actually, some of them are very beautiful. So we're going to continue on the topic of shofar, and let's go ahead and look then at.
I'll do 3.
It's short.
It's short.
I was almost complaining. But Rama, just biology curiosity.
Yes.
If you cut the horn of an animal, it grow again or never?
I think it depends on the animal. I don't know that. I'm not a biologist.
Probably was grow back.
Does it? I mean, I think I'm trying to remember. Empiricism. What have I remember seeing? I think I remember seeing goats that had one horn that was big and one horn that was small because the other one had broken off. I think I remember seeing that, but so we say bli neder, right? There's no promising on this. I just think I remember seeing that. So I think it depends on the animal. So you can't just get a shofar farm and just keep cutting them off.
No, yeah, because for example, I know that the rhino,
yeah, but that's not a horn.
It's
Not officially.
No.
Not a horn biologically.
Yeah.
Right.
Hair.
Right. Exactly. It's the same stuff as your fingernails.
Yeah. So I don't know. Because I don't think that they want to kill an animal in order to take the horn.
Probably not. No.
So if they want to cut an animal, the horn, okay, and that they use it for defense,
Right.
so you make dangerous their life,
But
because they can protect.
There's option number 2. Eat it.
Yeah.
Eat
Think
the
that's
animal.
what they do, probably. Yeah.
That's
You catch a kudu, you catch an ibex, you catch a gazelle, and you can shecht it, right? You do shchita, and it's kosher. We think like, whoa, who's going to eat an antelope? But they're kosher.
very expensive.
Yes, one of my favorite websites, the Zoo Rabbi, you know, he's having his new annual feast soon, where they serve rare kosher foods.
Where is this from?
It's in Israel.
In Israel?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's part of the tour. It's
It
part of
is.
the tour, by the way.
Yeah.
Just
The only thing I asked.
It's fine.
Well, not the feast.
If you want to see really the strangest animals,
Yeah.
go sign and register with the EW Israel.
Good commercial. Good commercial.
Okay. I think you convinced me.
All right. Chapter 3, Mishnah 3. Yerach, please continue.
The shofar used on Rosh HaShanah was that of an ibex, straight, and its mouth was overlaid with gold.
All right. So what?
Ibex.
So an ibex are the sheep gazelle that live like in Ein Gedi and places like that.
Okay, it's called ibex.
That's called an ibex in English. Well, it's not an English word originally. I don't know what word it is.
And Yael.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes, well.
Yael.
Yeah, but you say Yael.
They're coming in name.
Yeah, but you say Yael in English, and that doesn't help people.
No, we don't know how to say what. Yael, Yarl. But anyway.
I bet that happens. Yes.
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 Poor Yael.
I know. So most of us, we're used to the idea that it should be a ram's horn or maybe something else. But what are we talking about? A straight ibex horn?
Yeah.
This is in the days of the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple,
Uh-huh.
right? In the temple, they had to use a very special horn that was used, that they felt that was the correct horn, and it was this ibex horn, and it had to be with gold around near the tip,
Roll it.
not over the mouthpiece.
No?
No.
The other side.
Your lips, your lips still have to touch the horn, but near the end.
Oh.
So it was decorated a little bit.
So they change every year the shofar?
No, they had a very special one. That was
already used. Every year they use the same
yes, exactly. But for the rest of us, we don't have to use an ibex. But that was the type that was used in the temple days. That's what the Mishnah is saying.
And it's strange that they say it was straight. Usually it has to be curved. Shofar has to be curved.
So you're probably thinking of the rabbinic story that we often tell, that the shofar is bent, right? Why is the shofar bent for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Because you should be humble, right? You should be bent, right? And that's discussed in the Gemara. But they also say the shofar should be straight. Why should the shofar be straight? Because your mind should be straight on Rosh Hashanah, right? You should be straight and direct and clear before God.
And also the straight shofar are the kind of shofar that you call the king. You do that. It's a straight one. So in Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, you call the God of the king to think about us.
And that's what part 2 comes to.
Really? It was one of them?
Not about the king, no, but I mean about the trumpets,
That's
right?
So,
Part 2, yep.
There were 2 trumpets, one on each side of it.
Go ahead and
Go ahead.
Yeah.
The shofar gave a long blast, and the trumpets a short one, since the commandment of the day was with the shofar.
right. So for Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah of the sounding is with the shofar. So you have trumpets that are backup singers. They accompany it, but the shofar begins, and while it's going long, you get the trumpets going. So they do their own note, but the shofar continues so that it can be heard longer than the trumpets.
And which sound is the same Trua and or Kia?
Well,
The trumpet also, or only the shofar?
You jumping.
No, you're not jumping, but the sounding of the shofar, right? The mitzvah is one note. That's it. We have very good reasons for doing more, right? But it is
only the mitzvah. If you hear one note and then you suddenly go deaf, right? God forbid, you still did the mitzvah for that year. You still heard the sound of the shofar, even if you didn't hear all of the other notes. Right. So with regards to whatever the temple ceremony was, the mitzvah part just matters for that one note. And then they had their own choreography for everything else, just like we have our choreography for all the other soundings.
And the trumpets were only just one note, or were many notes?
They had their own choreography, their own style, if you would say. But the point was they were secondary. They couldn't overshadow the shofar. Right? The shofar was primary. They were secondary. The shofar was longer. They were shorter. That was what is trying to be said, because the mitzvah is for the shofar when it comes to Rosh HaShanah, which we're going to change when we get to the next Mishnah for a different day. We'll get there. Don't turn the page. Don't turn the page. But the idea of having these trumpets, right, is that this comes from Psalms. Remind myself, Psalm 98, where it says, "With trumpets and the sound of the shofar, right, you will make blast before God the King." So in the temple, they actually used trumpets as well. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay. All right. Chapter 3, Mishnah 4.
On fast day, they are of ram's carved, and with silver plated mouthpieces, and with 2 trumpets in the middle.
All right. Go ahead and read part 2, because it's a parallel.
The shofar blows short, and the trumpet blows long. For the commandment of the day is with the trumpets.
Okay. So we use a ram's shofar when it comes for fast days, but we also use silver trumpets. And the we also use trumpets. And the trumpet is the one that is actually the long one. That's the long sound. And the shofar is the short one. Now, why is the shofar secondary and the trumpet primary? If you look at the footnote from 10:9, the way the rabbis get this from Numbers 10:9 is that whenever we go out to war, God commanded that we would blow the trumpets. And since the fast day is supposed to be a call of alarm, a call of warning, right, of calling us to action, then we blow the trumpets, but also the shofar. Make sense? Right? So Rosh Hashanah, the main focus is to blow the shofar. So we blow the shofar and also the trumpets. But on fast days, we blow the trumpets and also the shofar.
So yeah, I can see the logic.
Right.
People might think, oh, a war is coming if they don't hear the shofar.
Well, but they're supposed to feel that there's danger, right? That's the whole point of having a public fast day, is to alert people that there's something, there's a need for the community. Sometimes I feel whenever people keep repeating, and then there's a tragedy, oh, my thoughts and prayers are for this person, my thoughts and prayers. It's like, you know what, if you really want to just pray, make a fast day for yourself, right? Have a fast, right? Make a fast. If you really want to be committed to focusing on a particular cause that you think is a problem, don't just tweet, my thoughts and prayers are with the person, right? Do something, declare a day. This is going to be a day of fast for all of us because of this tragedy, and follow through with it. Right? We're allowed to do that as Jews, and of course non-Jews as well.
But after the Declaration of Independence, also we did many of them in the day of fast.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think the first years of the Republic.
Right. So that idea of bringing people together, focusing on a big cause, a big problem, and having something tangible, not just like a tweet or a Facebook post or whatever. It would be a lot more meaningful. But that's harder. All right.
Numbers 10:9, you say.
What's that? Numbers 10:9. Isn't it in the footnotes in your book?
Yeah, it is.
No, in the Tans. They've got to mention that, because that's from the Gemara. I mean, the Gemara is the one that brings the
Numbers 10:2.
Well, 10:2 is where the section begins. So it's more than one verse. Okay, so now we're on chapter 3, Mishnah 5, and Natan, I think it's your turn.
Okay. The Jubilee year is similar to Rosh HaShanah, regarding the blowing of the shofar and the venerations.
Go ahead and do Rabbi Yehuda's.
Rabbi Yehuda says, on Rosh HaShanah we blow with rams,
and on the Jubilee years with well goats.
Right, with the ibex, with the IL. Right, with the long straight.
The long are from the goats.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right.
The trumpet. The long one is at the trumpet.
No, from the animal. Right, a trumpet is made only out of metal.
Okay.
Right, the shofar, a keren, is made from the animal's horn. And so what they're talking about here is from the animal, but it's the straight horn from the animal, not the curved horn, not the ram's horn.
Oh, okay. The ram is cool.
Yes, the ram is curved. All right. So of course, Yovel is the Jubilee year, the 50-year cycles, and as we know, it says that we have to sound the horn to proclaim the day for the Yovel for the community. And what this is trying to work out is, on that blowing, do we use the same rules as Rosh Hashanah, or do we use different rules of Rosh Hashanah? And the Chachamim, the general sages, they say it's the same as Rosh Hashanah. And for Rabbi Yehuda, he has a different opinion. Right? He says that for Rosh Hashanah, it should be of rams, and for the Jubilee, it should be for the ibex. But as we saw from the previous, the Chachamim, the sages, disagree. They say that on Rosh Hashanah, that it should be with an ibex. Again, this is talking about temple times, not about our times. Good? Okay. These are pretty straightforward. We're going to get things a little bit more complicated when we get to Mishnah 7 and 8. But Mishnah 6 is also pretty straightforward. Whose turn is it? Yeah.
5? Mishnah 5?
No, Mishnah 6.
6? Mishnah 6. Shofar which has a split and stuck it together is not valid.
Okay, so this is why you don't want to break your shofar, right? So just
split.
Yeah, pardon my drawing, but we're going to need a couple versions, right? So shofar, right? So if there is a crack in your shofar, it's not kosher. Well, yes and no. it's a maybe, but probably not. If the crack goes like all the way down, and then you just glue the two pieces back together, right? That's why when you want to make a shofar, you have to be very careful as you make it hollow. You can't just cut it in half, scrape out the middle, and then glue it together again. That's not kosher. If there's a little crack, then it becomes more debated, although the Talmud eventually comes down and says no, because a little crack may not affect the sound. Right? A little crack may not be a problem, but the problem is when you blow, a little crack is going to become a big crack, because that's the vibration is going to shake it apart. So the general halacha is, if it has a crack, it's not a kosher shofar for the mitzvah. You can still learn with it, you can still practice with it, but when it comes for the bracha and doing the mitzvah, you can't actually use a cracked shofar. Make sense? And definitely not a two-piece glued together shofar. Similar.
If he stuck together fragments of shofars, it is not valid.
All right, so imagine you drop your shofar and it breaks. Right, so now you've got two pieces. If you stick them together and blow, it's not kosher. However, if it's long enough, then that is still kosher. So if it's
the length, what's the minimum?
A tefach, a handbreadth. It has to be, according to the Gemara, that when you hold it in your hand to blow, you need to see it on this end and this end. Right? It has to be bigger than your hand. So as long as it's bigger than your hand, shofar is still valid. But if you need to stick pieces together to make it bigger, then no good. Get a new shofar. All right. 3. This is number 3 is the one that comes up more often in my experience that people have asked me about.
There was a hole in the shofar.
Have eaten holes into the shofar, right? Or maybe when the person was drilling it and cleaning it out, they weren't very careful and they put a hole in the side of the shofar.
So it's not kosher because affect the sound.
Well, that's what we have to answer. You have to read the rest of the Mishnah, though.
If
If
the one hole in the shofar and he closed it up, if it interferes with the blowing, it is not valid. But if it does not, it is valid.
all right, so if you have a hole in the shofar, not this one and this one, but these little holes, right? And you go, and it sounds fine, you can plug the holes. Right? If it doesn't need the plugging, then it's okay to plug them and use it as a kosher shofar. But if you go, and there's no sound because all the air is going out the holes, and then you plug the holes and it sounds beautiful, you can't use it. Right? If the hole is significant, if the hole changes the shofar from being workable to non-workable, then don't bother fixing it unless you want to practice with it, but you definitely can't use it for the mitzvah. On the other hand, if the hole doesn't matter, but it's just a decorative thing, then if you need to plug it up with a piece of shofar, of actual horn, then it is kosher. Make sense? And if it's kosher without the plug, it's kosher with the plug. If it's not kosher without the plug, plugging it doesn't make it kosher again.
You know, I have a shofar I got, and every Rosh HaShanah I'm trying
Right?
to blow it, to practice at least.
Right.
And what I found, and from YouTube, what I see is it's not the blowing, it's the way your lips vibrate.
The embouchure, or whatever they call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how did the horns affect it? I don't
That's actually a really good question, and one that I'm very thankful to my sister-in-law for, because my sister-in-law is a trumpetist, like classically trained, brilliant trumpetist, and she was explaining to me, about making a trumpet. If you ever looked at a trumpet, right, at the mouthpiece is like a bell, right? It looks like that, and then it sticks into the rest of the horn. And that's because your lips fit in to that cup. Yeah. And so when you go, it really vibrates very, very easily, and there's lots of room. The problem is that's for a trumpet. Most shofar, and they drill a hole. Right? Most people, when they buy a shofar in the gift shop, they're not buying an instrument, they're buying decoration. And when they make them in most of the gift stores, they just drill a hole through the middle and cut it flat, and that's what you're left with. If you're lucky, maybe they'll scrape a little bit of a cup. But the cup is like, smaller than my pinky fingernail.
But you can open it more.
Of course.
With careful and
little careful carving, you can make more room for your lips. More room for your lips means it's easier to blow, right? Because trying to get your lips to blow like on a watermelon seed, it's impossible. You need more room, which is why my sister-in-law actually made my shofar. And when she made my shofar, she carved a much nicer mouthpiece for me, which is why it's much easier for me to blow my shofar, for anybody to blow my shofar, than most other shofarot. Because if you have a bigger mouthpiece, it's much easier to use it as an instrument. So if you're going to a store and you want to buy a shofar, check the mouthpiece. Right? If it's just a little dinky hole that someone drilled and that's it.
I think that's what I got.
Yeah, it's lovely decoration, good reminder, but don't try and use it as an instrument. You can, but it's really, really hard.
To some expert that say, I'm going to Brooklyn next week. Maybe I'll take it with me and have them carve.
Well, it's really not that hard. Horn is not a very hard material, and it's just a little bit of scraping to smooth out and give a little more room for your lips. Yeah, that's all you need. Yeah, my sister-in-law, I like to brag a little bit. She can do what's called circular breathing, which means she can blow with her mouth while still breathing through her nose. So when she went to the synagogue and she said, I'd like to blow the shofar for high holidays, I said, well, could you give us a tekiah gedolah? Right? They wanted to test her to make sure she had enough air. And she said, well, how long would you like it? And they said, just do as long as you want, as you can. Okay. And she's like, no. Do you want it 1 minute, 5 minutes? And they said, just do it. And so she went and just kept going. And they're like, okay. Yeah, we got the idea.
I know my brother and my son-in-law, he used to be a trumpeter also. He blows the shofar better than me.
Of course, because he's at least trained his lips.
Yeah, it's a technique.
Right, he's trained his lips. So even with a bad mouthpiece, someone who's really been practicing can do it. So you can work with yours, and eventually you can get it. but it's really, really hard. You'll see, you'll see some people try to do it like in the corner of their mouth because they can get, a tighter seal because there's only one side. But really the best solution is to make a little more room for your lips. Yeah. But if the piece of horn is too small, then that might not be possible. What some people will do is they'll cut a little more of the horn off, as long as it's still long enough, and then they've got more room for doing the mouthpiece. But it depends how the shofar was made in the first place. So check out your shofar. And that's also very funny. One of the reasons why you'll take these shofarot that have very, very small mouthpieces, and like you'll see these adults going and getting nothing, and they'll hand them to a kid, and the kid will go exactly, because they've got smaller lips. Right? So it's like a kid-sized mouthpiece. You don't put a kid with a grown-up mouthpiece on a trumpet. You have to get a kid-sized mouthpiece for the trumpet. And most shofarot come with kid-sized mouthpieces. So it's not just that the kids are gifted. When they get older, they can't do it, but that same size. They need a bigger mouthpiece. Okay, so that handles Mishnah 6. Mishnah 7. Now we get down to the actual hearing.
Okay. One who blows into a pit or a cistern or a jug, if he heard the sound of the shofar, he has fulfilled his obligation.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
But if he hears the echo, he has not fulfilled his obligation.
Okay, so first of all, let's just do a little bit of history. Why is someone blowing the shofar at the bottom of a pit? Right? Why? Because they want to muffle the sound. Because there are Romans or others that have prohibited us from observing our holidays. So you've got a guy who wants to do Rosh HaShanah, but he also doesn't want to be killed by the Romans. So he goes into a pit, down into like a cave or a cistern, and he's, blowing the shofar a little bit more secretly. And the question is, does that count? And this is what's going to point out, is that when you blow the shofar, erase my silly trumpet, when you blow the shofar, you haven't done the mitzvah, right? There is no mitzvah to blow a shofar. There is a mitzvah to hear the shofar, right? So the sound goes out, and what sound reaches your ear, right? Is it the sound of the shofar, or is it the sound bouncing off the wall coming to your ear? Right? And if it's bouncing off the wall, then it's no longer the pure sound of the shofar. Now it's being distorted by the echoes, by the stone, by the dirt, whatever it is that you're blowing against. And therefore you're not hearing the shofar, you're hearing the photocopy of the shofar. And so the idea was, if you can blow it and it sounds like it is the shofar without any distortion or any blurring because of the echo, then yes, you are good. You fulfilled your commandment, and yotze, as we say, you fulfilled your obligation. On the other hand, if you blow it and it's just all the echo, nope, sorry, doesn't count. Find a better place to blow. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Good.
Number 2. Also, one who was passing behind a synagogue, or if his house was next to the synagogue.
Very convenient.
And he heard the sound of the shofar or the Megillah being read, if he directed his heart or intention, then he has fulfilled his obligation.
I'll go ahead and do.
But if not, he has not fulfilled his obligation.
Go ahead and read part A.
That's good because people don't need to pay the fees.
Oh, that's it. I need to pay the fees.
Yeah. Hear it from the backyard.
Yeah, but that's not the only mitzvah. But go ahead and read part A.
Even though this one heard and this one heard, this one directed his heart and this one did not.
Okay, so imagine worst case scenario. You've got two guys, and there's the street, and the shofar is being blown in the synagogue, and Mr. A, when he hears the sound, he's like, wait, they're blowing the shofar. It's a mitzvah to hear the sound of the shofar, and he listens for the next blast. Boom. He has fulfilled his obligation, right? Because he is listening to it. He has the kavanah, right? But Mr. B, he's walking by, and there's And he just keeps walking. And then later that night, he goes, oh, right. It was probably the shofar they were blowing. No point. No, they both heard the same thing, right? They had the same auditory experience, to be all scientific, technical sounding, right? The same sound waves hit both of their ears. Their ears both took that and sent it to their brain. They had the same experience, and they didn't have the same experience because one of them experienced it through the lens of mitzvah, and the other one experienced it through the lens of noise or music or whatever else he was thinking, but he wasn't thinking mitzvah. And so what this is reminding us is exactly about that lens of Torah is how we have to look at the world, right? If you don't use the lenses of Torah, everything's blurry. At least for me, right? If you don't wear the lenses, if you don't mean to look at it with that idea, with that kavanah, that intention, then it's all blurry, and you don't actually perform the mitzvah. And that's what happens to Mr. B. Decide, even though Mr. A got the experience. So sometimes showing up is enough, but sometimes you have to actually have that intention to make it click. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay.
All these people who are coming in Rosh HaShanah and just hear the shofar and then boom, out the door.
But,
that's fine.
Well, I'm not going to say it's fine.
Also, they can stand up in the parking lot and open the ticket, listening with kavanah, the shofar, and that.
So, first of all, I don't think you can hear the shofar from the parking lot. I've never tried. Maybe I should do a test run.
I think you can.
What were you doing in the parking lot?
From the front.
Maybe if you were outside the glass doors, but not in the parking lot.
No, but
Yeah, at the glass doors where the security is. Yeah. From there, yes, yeah. So yes, technically, if someone stands there and they say, "I'm going to sit right here until I hear the shofar, so I can fulfill the mitzvah," then they are yotze. They have fulfilled the mitzvah only of the shofar.
Okay.
They haven't fulfilled any of the other needs of Rosh Hashanah. So, but that one, yes, that one they did. And technically, yes, they can then go home and they can do the rest of the tefillah by themselves and all the other things for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and absolutely that's fine. However, I would argue that they are still violating the commandment of do not separate yourself from the community. Right, which is a big mitzvah, especially with Tisha B'Av just coming up over the weekend, but also on Rosh Hashanah, being together with the community is a commandment. And so, while you can do it by yourself, and if you're living in Alaska and there's no synagogue for 500 miles, and you're there for Rosh Hashanah for whatever reason, and you have a shofar, blow mitzvah, do your own tefillah, and you're fine. But if you have a congregation that you could be with and you're not, then you've got a problem. And especially, in our congregation, we don't turn anybody away. We may charge for tickets, but we do not turn anyone away who says, I can't.
I have a question. You just mentioned something about somebody in Alaska, far away. It's enough that he blows the shofar one blow and hears it, and that's
if that's all he can. Yeah,
that's
I mean, if he can do the full service the way that our tradition has given it to us. Exactly, that he should. But if he can only blow one, and that's it.
I'm in Alaska. This is
yeah. I'm not recommending it, but
yeah.
You know that?
number 8 is low.
Yes. I want to do 6 and 7.
Yes, but number 8 is fascinating, right? And it's going to continue. Number 8 is going to continue to take this idea of kavanah, of intention, and it's going to really try to sharpen our understanding of, is it the physical experience by itself, or is it what I make of the physical experience that matters, right? So Mishnah 8 is going to really make that lesson very, very clear.
That's what you meant for.
Well, let's see what the Mishnah says.
And it came to pass when Moses raised his hand and that Israel rebelled.
Okay, so it's what? Right, so when we are fighting, right? Well, this quote's from Exodus, from Shemot,
Yeah.
right? But it happens in other places, right? But when he's holding his hands up,
He's right.
Israel wins. When his hands go down, Israel is losing the battle, right? So when his hands are held up, then Israel's fine. And so what's the question? Is this magic?
That won the battle or lost the battle?
Right. What? If he'd gone like this, would it have been a tie? Is Moses got magic hands? Is that what's going on? Who won the battle? Right? His magic hands, and the answer they give?
Rather, the Torah teach you, as long as Israel looked heavenward and subjected their heart to their Father in heaven, they would prevail. But when they did not, they would fall.
Okay, so one more diagram. All right, so pardon me for my Moses drawing. He looks like everybody else, but that's Moses, right? And then you have, he was like up on a hill, and then you have down here, you have the war. When the people looked up at his hands, right, they saw the sky, which was a reminder of Shemaim, which is a reminder of heaven, which is a reminder of God. And so when he holds his hands up, everyone looks up, and boom, I'm thinking about heaven, I'm thinking about God, my heart is with God, I can fight, we can win. And when his hands went down, they didn't look up anymore, and now they're not thinking about God. Their kavanah, their intention is very different.
Similar to the snake.
We're almost there.
Yeah.
No. We're almost there, literally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
In a similar manner, make a fiery serpent.
Fiery.
Huh?
Fiery or brazen is another term.
Okay. Fiery serpent and set it up on a pole, and it shall come to pass that whatever is bitten will look at it and live. And live.
Right. Go ahead and read the next little bit.
Was it the serpent that killed or the serpent that gave life?
Right. So he's got the stick, and it's got a snake, built onto it. And when people look up at the snake, they don't die from the snake bites. And when people don't look at the snake, they do die of the snake bite. So is it a magic thing to look at? Right? Is when my eyes look at it, is it sending back magic healing rays that are fixing me?
Rather, when Israel looked heavenward and subjected their heart to their Father in heaven, they were healed. But when they did not, they perished.
Right.
That's a nice way to put it.
Well, but it's true both in the literal sense that when they looked up, they thought of God, and that allowed them to be sustained. And it's also true metaphorically that whenever the Jewish people are connected to God, focus on trying to bring God's Torah into their life and into their world, we do better. And when we turn our back on that, we melt away,
Yes.
right? We disintegrate. Even if we don't perish in the sense of, I fall over dead, we as a people or we as an individual, as part of the people, we disappear, right? We turn to dust.
It's like a show and tell. Kind of show and tell, yeah. Sometimes you show something to kids, and instead of
A visual aid.
Yeah, a visual aid, exactly.
Right. Or another way to think of it is the conductor at an orchestra, right? When the conductor goes and everybody gets ready, is it because he has magic over them? Are they puppets? No. When they pay. But if he didn't do this, they wouldn't have anything to pay attention to. But there's a problem. We'll save the last piece for a second, right? There is a problem with that, which is after a while, people tend to think that the serpent does have magic powers, right? After a while, that kind of stuff does sort of feel magic-y. If I look at this, I get better. People maybe are supposed to look through it towards God, but a lot of times people stop looking past it. And they end up making it into an idol. And in fact, in the days of Hezekiah, they had to destroy the serpent. They got rid of it because people had turned it into an idol. So if the symbol works, then we keep using it. If the symbol becomes an obstacle for what the symbol is supposed to do, then we get rid of it. Right? Symbols are only as good as their ability to inspire our capacity to understand God. Okay, and with this, we're now going to make one summary statement about what it means to have intention. And as soon as Natan finishes his notes, he's going to read that line, that section for us.
Okay. A deaf person and imbecile and a minor cannot discharge the obligation of the lady.
Okay. So let's make sure we understand this category, right? A deaf mute, right? Someone who can't speak and hear, right? An imbecile is your
mute.
Well, in the old days, that was automatic, right? Nowadays, we'll come back to that. Nowadays, if somebody's deaf, they can still learn to speak. But 2,000 years ago, if you were deaf, not only did you not learn how to speak, but we now know medically, your brain doesn't completely develop because you don't have a symbolic language. And without that ability to have a language in your mind, you never fully develop the rational capabilities that other human beings have. So being deaf 2,000 years ago was much, much worse mentally for a person than it is today. Because yes, today they can tell that the child is deaf, they can begin training and no problem. But back then, someone born deaf, they would never properly develop mentally. And they would never learn how to speak because they could never hear the sounds to reciprocate. This is one of the reasons why the story of Helen Keller was so important. Helen Keller. In America, there was a woman named Helen Keller who had a very bad, I think it was scarlet fever, very bad illness, and she lost her hearing when she was just a baby. And so she was like a wild child. And then a woman worked with her and trained her how to speak, trained her how to communicate. Oh, and she was also blind. So she was blind and mute and deaf, but she eventually taught her how to communicate, and it changed the woman's life. And it also changed how we treated deaf people, because now rather than just saying, they're deaf and crazy, we said, they're deaf, but we can reach them and we can help them and they'll be fine and be like, other people, just they can't hear. Imbecile or lunatic, depending upon your translation. Again, we're not talking about someone who's low IQ. We're talking about someone who is actually mentally incapacitated, right? Cannot function at a mental level that is,
his age.
Yeah, not even just his age, but I mean even anything that has reason or reliability. And then of course a minor, it's a child, right? A child is still growing. And what is unique about all of these three? They can't have kavanah, right? They can't have intention, and their intention, even what they might have, is not stable or understandable or relatable to the rest of the community. And for someone to make the community yotze, right? For example, for someone to say a bracha, which other people will say amen to, or for someone to lead services to which other people will fulfill their duty by participating in, you have to, I almost gave away the last line. If you want to do a duty on behalf of someone else, then read the last line.
So
before that, yes.
So that's the same idea that we saw in Sukkot.
Yes, exactly.
Sukkot, because they cannot have kavanah, that's why they cannot fulfill
the obligation. Right, exactly right.
It's I had experience with that.
Mm-hmm.
In the Brooklyn synagogue that my brother-in-law used to go,
right,
there was a deaf person.
Right.
No, a blind. He was blind. I'm sorry. And he would read not the Torah, but he would read the Torah.
Right. Well, and blind, even historically, blind was very different, right? Because blind, you still learned language, you still were able to develop mentally. And that was a very different situation. So yes, there were issues when it came to reading from the Torah, because if you're blind, you can't actually see the Torah. And because when we read from the Torah, we're not supposed to be reading from memory, we're supposed to be reading the words there. That's still a bit of an issue, but everything else legally and their capacity to lead services or do mitzvot on behalf of others, that was always the same for blind as well as sighted people. But deaf was very different back then because they lacked the skills to reach them. And be thankful we live now. All right, but
this is the general rule.
Exactly.
Whoever is not obligated in a matter cannot discharge obligation.
Okay, so this is a very important and very, I'm trying to think of the right adjective for it. It's almost a compassionate thing.
So for that rule, so women cannot lead the service.
We'll come back there. We'll come back to that, right? Because like I said, the last Mishnah is very interesting, has lots of details. So let's deal first with the three, right? A minor is not obligated to the commandments. Does that mean they should run around murdering people or, eating treif? No, of course not. But it means that because they're a minor, they don't yet have the obligation to follow the commandments, even if they're supposed to be learning and training. And that means because they lack the obligation, they can't do it on behalf of us. Because if you don't have the obligation, how can you possibly understand what it is you're doing? Right? If you don't feel the responsibility, then you can't do the responsibility, even if you do the action, right? To go back to our Mr. A and B, right? Even if you do physically what you're supposed to do, right? Take a 5-year-old and teach him the wedding ceremony and have him go to a 5-year-old girl and give her a ring and say, harayat. They're not married, right? Even if they did the words, they did the action without the kavanah, without the understanding of being, old enough to know what those words mean, of what it is you're doing by getting married and what that means. It's just play. It's just a show. And for people that are too young, or for people that have had unfortunate damage or undevelopment for their minds, we can't say, why isn't he doing the Shema? Right? Why isn't he, reading from the Torah? Because he lacks the ability to do that. But because he lacks the ability, he also lacks the ability to do it on our behalf. So even if you could train somebody that was, mentally challenged to recite the entire service, they can't be the Shaliach Tzibor because they don't really know what they're doing. I mean, they know how to do it, but they don't know why they're doing it. They don't have the full understanding. And if you don't have the full understanding, then I can't use you to do my duty. To come back to the question of women. So yes, this was indeed one of the major issues. I don't know if you were here. It was a few years ago when I did a whole nutshell series about women in halakha. But because those are sort of random weekends, I don't know if you were here. But many people think about like women's egalitarianism as being like one question, but it isn't. There are many different questions. So for example, having women read from the Torah publicly is a much easier discussion, right? That's very simple to have. It's clear from the sources that women had the obligation or had the permission to do it, and then that permission was taken away when it was considered embarrassing to the community. If it's not embarrassing now, the permission goes back, no problem. But for this, we have to say then, do women have the chiyuv? Are they obligated to do these commandments? Because if they're not obligated and are doing it only as a volunteer, then that's problematic. So too, by the way, if a man who is obligated but doesn't understand what his obligation is, have him lead the service is also problematic. So you can just take some random guy and say, here, read these words. No, he has to know why he's doing, not just how to say the sounds. So in the conservative movement, we have said that the reason women were off the hook, that they were not obligated to some of the commandments in the Torah, was precisely because of the social relationship between them and the men in the ancient world. Right? In the ancient world, everything was patriarchal, right? Land and wealth and household organization was all passed through the male line. Because of that, women were always going to be beholden. They always needed the man to provide them a place to live, the resources to work with, and the overall structure for life. And that meant that they had to answer to their husband or father or brother. And if they had to serve him, they couldn't also be expected to serve God when God said, come. Right? So if God says it's shacharit, and her husband says, do the laundry, unfortunately, in the ancient world, the husband had first dibs. Right? It overruled. And so we let women off the hook. It doesn't mean women were innately off the hook. It meant that because of the social structure, we didn't want to force them to have to fight with their husband every single time, or at least with some husbands. In the modern world, yeah, try that. Right? Go tell your do the laundry. I'm going to go, to Minyan. Yeah, see how well that works. Right? Now, if that works, then yes, women are off the hook, and God understands that they've married a husband who hasn't caught up to the 21st century. On the other hand, if you're living in a household like most of us, where it's a partnership of more equals rather than one who's over the other, then women's obligations are back on. Right? They are not off the hook anymore. They were given a special break because of the way society was structured. Society has changed. Their excuse is gone. And that means they are obligated. And therefore, if they want to lead or do mitzvot on behalf of others, and they understand what it is they're doing and why, then they are welcome to do so. But it is that last part, of course, that the Orthodox continue to dispute. And perhaps within their communities, because of the gender structure, maybe it's more appropriate. I don't know. But I know that within ours, if women have equal rights, they have equal responsibilities.
Even with the Orthodox, I see kind of easing up.
In some communities,
Yeah,
yes.
some communities,
in some communities.
I was in the DC,
Mhm.
Orthodox synagogue, and what they do is when they take the Torah,
Yes.
it's taken by the women and then passed to the men
Yes.
to the bima.
So my guess is that's probably what's known as a open Orthodox congregation. That's just a new term that they've begun to use in the last 5-10 years, maybe, for more modern than modern Orthodox. And yes, there is a growing desire to have that kind of community among the Orthodox. I mean, obviously among us as well, but among the Orthodox.
Chabad let women say Kaddish.
Right.
As long as a man says it. You know, when a man says it, they can say it too.
They can also be saying it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that was...
Or maybe even...
No, I think that when Leora was saying the Kaddish,
Yes.
she did by herself.
By herself. Yeah,
Correct?
Yeah, he's right.
Right.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, if I remember correctly.
Right. I mean, they're reaching the same conclusions that we reached, right? Which is that the nature of the relationship is such that we shouldn't be excusing women from certain commandments. That we should be saying, look, it's good, you know, you've got your own job, you have your own freedom, you can have a bank account if you and your husband both want that. But all these freedoms also come now with more duties, more responsibilities, and that's great. Welcome to the team. Right? It's in Judaism, freedom always means more responsibility.
Well, what about the feeling? The feeling is specifically for men, is it?
No, no. Nowhere does it say that tefillin is only for men. Certainly not in halacha or in the Talmud in general, nor the Torah. Women were exempt from wearing, but they were not prohibited from wearing. Right, the same way that a woman would be exempt from, for example, doing the Amidah with the community in the synagogue. That doesn't mean she's not exempt, that she's not allowed to pray. Right? She just doesn't have to be there when the rest of us are there. In the traditional halacha, nowadays we do want her to be there. And tefillin as well. Women didn't have to wear tefillin because it was time bound, and therefore her duties to her family and her duties to God would be in conflict. But now that she is in more control of her own time, then absolutely, yes, women should wear tefillin. And we teach our girls how to wear tefillin, and when we encourage them to do so and encourage women to wear tefillin at minyan if they're willing. Unfortunately, many women, like many men, are still uncomfortable with the mitzvah of tefillin. But, you know, we're working on it. At least they have a better reason for being uncomfortable, because most women never grew up seeing tefillin. Whereas with men, I don't know why they keep running away.
Rabbi, next week is the last week for Rosh Hashanah.
Well, it's the last chapter. We'll see if we can get all the way through it.
Are you planning? Are you thinking already what's next?
So I thought we might try, because we've done a couple of the festivals, the Chagim. So I thought we might try to do something to mix it up. So I was wondering whether we might go into the criminal justice system.
Oh.
Makot.
Huh?
Makot. Whipping. It deals with more than just whipping people, but the idea of how do you punish, also it has a lot to say about witnesses, which is another issue with regards to women. So I thought that would be, it's not very long, but I thought that would be a nice change. And maybe we'll reflect that nowadays when we commit a transgression, we do tshuva for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We don't have to worry about someone flogging us. No whips. no whips. So we'll try that, and then we'll circle around. So yes, next week Rosh Hashanah, maybe hopefully we'll be able to finish, and then the week after that we'll begin Makot.
Oh, next week I'm not going to be here
Ah,
because I'm going to
the Brooklyn.